We're all a bit lazy, especially spiritual people who rely heavily on things like manifesting and going with the flow. In a previous spiritual perspective, we talked about the concept of going with the flow and how it's not always appropriate to go with the flow, especially if we have been neglecting the key areas of our life: health, career, finances, relationships. We've been neglecting those parts and not making the aligned choices often enough. Then those areas start to diminish, they start to decline, we start to feel contracted, and we wonder why I feel so stuck and how am I going to get myself out? And as spiritual people, we tend to put a little bit too much emphasis on the universe, just figuring it out and manifesting something and all the other airy-fairy and woo-woo type of language around course correction in life. And we absolve ourselves from having to do the hard work of making those strong choices on a regular basis. And so that's what the last episode was about, is we have to disrupt those areas where we feel like we've been going with the flow too much, meaning we've been accepting mediocrity for ourselves too much. And we have no choice but to make strong choices for ourselves if we want to course correct. And so in today's episode, we're going to look at how to actually move in the direction of a course correction. I gave the analogy of using sticks of dynamite to clear a log jam in that Go With The Flow episode. So if you haven't seen that episode, definitely check it out so you can understand that analogy. One thing that I didn't get into in that other episode is the human tendency to be lazy. If we're being honest, we're all a bit lazy when it comes to doing the things that we're going to need to do in order to see the kinds of results that we ultimately want to see, especially spiritual people who rely heavily on things like manifesting and going with the flow. Those are sometimes appropriate responses, as we said, when things are moving in the direction that you want them to go in. But if life is not moving in the direction that you want it to go in, those are lazy responses to doing the hard work that is necessary for correcting the trajectory of your life, and especially in those key areas. Okay, so let's say you buy into that. What do I do next? Trying to course correct is creating so much headwind, so much resistance. It feels like this is not meant to be. That's another spiritual phrase that gets tossed around a lot. It's not meant to be because it's hard. And something being hard doesn't always mean it's not meant to be. It could mean that you've neglected it for so long that now correcting it is going to cause a lot of internal friction, and it's going to create a lot of work for yourself that really you should have been doing the whole time. But because we neglect it, now it seems almost insurmountable. Okay. And I call this episode the Constantinople Effect because I don't know how many of you all have heard of the story of Constantinople. So Constantinople was the last stronghold of the Roman Empire, and it was around for thousands of years. And it was the connecting point between Europe and Asia. And famously, Constantinople, which was a walled city, and it was operated and controlled by the Roman Empire, or what they called the Byzantines. It had this 15-foot thick, 40-foot high wall. And that was their protection against all the invaders and the invasions that they constantly experienced over and over throughout all of those thousands of years. And the wall was legendary for being impenetrable. Nobody could take it. At the height of Constantinople, they had about 1 million residents. But as the Roman Empire started to decline, Constantinople's population decreased to about 40 or 50,000 people. And the thing that signified the end of Constantinople, this is in the 1400s, there was an Ottoman emperor known as Mehmed, the Emperor Mehmed, and he was just hell-bent on toppling Constantinople. So he took the same approach that everybody else took, attacking Constantinople from the front. And Constantinople was positioned on a harbor. They call it the Golden Horn Harbor. And on one side of the harbor was the ocean, and on the other side of the harbor was this little river inlet. And they had chained off access to the inlet so that no attacking army could get their ships up and attack them on the weaker side of the wall. I know all this sounds like a lot, but just go with me for a second. So Mehmed was attacking Constantinople from the front. And the thing that they did that was different from everybody else was they brought out these massive cannons, and they were shooting those cannons into this so-called impenetrable wall, and it was starting to weaken the wall of Constantinople. But as the Byzantines were able to repair the wall quickly, it looked like the cannons weren't going to be able to do the trick. So Mehmed had an idea. He said, since we can't get our warships past the chains into the inlet so we can attack them on the weaker side, what if we transported the boats over the hills and put them back into the water on the other side of the chains? Now we're talking about a 3 to 4 mile distance from the ocean over the hills and into the other side of the chains on the river inlet. So he says, what if we do that? What if we take all 70 of our warships and we take them over the hills and we put them in the inlet, and then we can attack them, we can cut off their supply chains, and then we can topple the city that way. Obviously, this is an impossible task, but they had about 60 to 70,000 soldiers. And so they got logs and they put animal fat and oil on the logs, and they slid the boats, which were about 40 to 50 tons each, out of the water, and one by one, they would take the logs and they would move them to the front, slide the boat forward, take the back logs, move them back to the front again, slide the boat forward. And they did that over the course of one night. They moved 70 ships over the hills and into the inlet on the other side of the chains. And once they did that, they shocked the Byzantines and they attacked the weak side of the wall and they toppled Constantinople.
5 signs that your meditation practice is too complicated. Number 1, you rarely feel like doing it. Number 2, when you do sit to meditate, your mind feels like a fire hose full of random thoughts. Number 3, you're focusing on your breath or on something else. Number 4, your body gets antsy and you just want to lie down. And last but not least, you can't wait for the time to end and you feel relieved when it does. If any of these sound familiar, you're working way too hard in meditation. And here's the truth, most people are. But the good news is that the fix is embarrassingly simple, but you won't find it in a book or in an online course, not even my own. That's because learning how to master meditation is a lot like learning how to ride a bike or how to swim. Those activities are extremely simple to do, but impossible to learn without somebody teaching you the principles and then providing you with real-time feedback. And meditation is no different. That's why in the age of AI, I still teach live in-person meditation trainings. And if you're ready to master meditation, you're invited to Mexico City this fall to learn how to meditate with ease, the way meditation was always meant to be learned. Just go to mexico.beginmeditating.com or click the QR code to get all of the information about the early registration discount. And I hope to see you in Mexico City very soon.
And this is interesting because when we talk about going with the flow, even when you're taking progressive action and attacking something head on, it still may not be making that big of a difference. And so the lazy part of our human nature is, okay, well, I've tried everything. So obviously the universe doesn't want me to achieve whatever the goal happens to be. But have you considered the impossible? And the impossible is your version of transporting the ships 3 to 4 miles over the hills and putting them on the other side of the impenetrable chains that were blocking this pathway so that you can get to the weak side of your resolve. In other words, what is the impossible? What is something that you have thought about, but you're like, no, I can't do that. That's just too difficult. No one would be able to do that. What if you considered doing exactly that? And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Carrying 70, 40-ton ships across 3 miles of land was not easy. That's what it took to topple Constantinople. That's what it takes a lot of times to reverse course in the key areas of our life that we've neglected for so long, when the manifesting and the going with the flow program and the progressive action is not actually working. And once Constantinople got toppled by the Ottoman Empire, then that walled city became the city that we know and love today called Istanbul. So Istanbul is where Constantinople once stood, and it became the jewel of the Ottoman Empire. All that drama that unfolded, all of those impossible missions and goals that were taken on, evolved into this really beautiful, wonderful place. So all that to say, Expand your idea of what's possible. And that's really more of a mindset than anything else. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to make money, if you're trying to keep your relationship together, if you're trying to change careers, challenge your thinking around that's not possible, this is possible, and find your version of taking those ships over the hill and putting them in the water so you can topple your resolve. If this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it, with someone who's talking themselves out of doing difficult things because they think that it's not meant to be or something like that. And make sure you check out the Go with the Flow episode, as well as my episode on the Easy Life Lie. Thank you very much for your support. It means a lot. And we'll see you in the next Spiritual Perspective episode.